Everybody, welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martijn Lofvers. I'm Chief Trend Watcher of Supply Chain Media. You might also know me as the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement. It's a bi-weekly newsletter and also a huge LinkedIn group, but also a European Quarterly. And I'm also the architect of the SCM IT Supermap Europe. You may know it with an overview of all the supply chain software available in Europe with a lot of expertise. The next hour we have a great, interesting and an interactive webinar. We'll talk about how to optimize your supply chain, your network for carbon emission. And with me I have two experts. So let's introduce them. So on the left hand side you see myself, but next to me I have Zoë Kokje Schouten from AIMMS. Hi Zoë.
Hi Martijn.
So you have a background also in logistics, and you have also experience in the warehouse and logistics kind of software, and now you are responsible for product management at AIMMS.
Correct.
Right. Next to you, we have Facundo Olivero, supply chain consultant at AIMMS. So welcome, Facundo.
Hi, Martin. Thank you very much.
So you have also an engineering background, so we are all in sync about our own backgrounds, and we'll talk about supply chain network design and sustainability in the next hour. But first, I would like to tell that this webinar will be recorded, and the PDF will be made available afterwards. So everybody can ask questions. You're all on mute, but you have two options to be interactive with the two experts. So there is a chat function on the right-hand side. You can ask questions, but probably the questions will be answered by the rest of the audience. But you can also ask questions in a Q&A functionality. Also on the right hand side you see the text bubble. So I will track down the questions being asked there, and if these questions are in line of the conversation I'm having with Zoe and Facundo, I will ask these questions right away. But there's also a Q&A at the end. So if these questions are a bit out of line of the current conversation, I will reserve them for the end. And if you still have questions, there's another 30 minutes afterwards where we sit down in the virtual lounge. So Zoe, Facundo, and myself will be sitting down at table 1. So if you have more questions to ask, you can have a further conversation with the three of us in the virtual lounge at 5 o'clock. So as of now, we will put off the camera. So basically, you can enlarge your screen. So you see at the upper right side of your screen, you see 4 small arrows. So you can enlarge your presentation to have a better view of the slides. All right. So first, AIMMS. The two experts are from AIMMS. So AIMMS is a software vendor, and you see the two. You see all the software vendors represented here, and you see AIMMS at the right hand side here. We have a whole discussion about and this software map represent all the software vendors in Europe, and AIMMS is also one of them, and they are specialized in network design, but also in S&OP, production planning. And now we get into the area also of demand planning and forecasting. So we have a discussion that AIMMS will also get an extra subway station on this line. But that is how to explain how to present AIMMS in the whole field of supply chain software vendors. All right. But Zoe, maybe you can tell me a bit more about AIMMS, about your company.
Yes, of course. If you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So AIMMS, I don't know if everybody knows them, so let's start from the beginning. So AIMMS is a Dutch-based company. We're located in Haarlem in the Netherlands. That's our headquarters. But we have offices globally, so we have a worldwide reach. And we've been in this business, so in the decision-making business, as I call it, for more than 30 years. And we provide technology for network design and to summarize what network design is, it's the ability to make a digital copy of your supply chain, visualize your supply chain, and then run scenarios towards it. And that's used in different ways. I will explain more later. I think from our perspective, what makes us different in our industry is that we have an extremely high customer satisfaction, and I think that has to do with the DNA of the company. So on everything that we do, we constantly consider how we can help our customers. So we have a lot of personal contact with our customers. We take all their input and we translate it also into our roadmap. So together with customers, we drive the direction of travel with our roadmap. And also as part of our mission is that we want to make the lives of our users as easy as possible. So when I tell like family and friends what I'm doing, like network design is often perceived as a complex type of technology, and you need very specialized skills to run network design studies, or you need to outsource it even. And I think that world has changed significantly, and AIMMS is a big player there because we de-skilled the whole network design, and our end users now, who are supply chain teams, are able to operate these tools by themselves, and we will guide them through along their journey. So therefore, I think our customer satisfaction and how customers play a role in our product strategy and in the way we develop technology is very key.
Yeah, and I see also, next to manufacturing and wholesale and retail companies, your tools are also being used by consultants for their advice, but also by universities.
Yeah, you're correct. Yeah. So indeed, if we call them partners, so our partners, if they run studies at customers, then they take the AIMMS technology with them to operate those studies. And indeed, it's also used at industries to to enhance students there and to make their studies even better by the use of the tool.
Yeah, and if you have a look at it, this is how it looks like. This is your supply chain network design tool. So I know that a lot of people are still using Excel, but now in this complex world, we need more and more visualization.
Yes, and I think the power in the visualization, that's really key. So we have a lot of customers coming from Excel saying, okay, yeah, we used Excel, but that has limitations. And it also is not the most efficient way of operating like a scenario optimization technology. I think the power of this visualization is really a step beyond what you can do in Excel. And the power of visualization also allows for better decision making. So our users often take the visualization. So everything is in the cloud. So you just pick up your laptop, you go to your colleague, or you go to your stakeholders, or you go to your boardroom, and you actually show what the impact of a certain decision is. And that's so powerful because everybody gets the visualization, everybody gets the map, and then the options that you have when you run a certain scenario become really, really clear because you can see the outcomes, you can see how your network changes if you run different scenarios. So yeah, full answer is yes, the visualizations are very, very powerful.
Another thing is, there's a lot of talking lately about digital twins, and you can have a digital twin on a machine level, on a warehouse level, or factory level, but also on a supply chain network. And basically, I think that compared to say 10, 20 years ago, the digital twin has now the ability to have real data on order level in your environment, in your network design tool. So this is also a tool, to build your own digital twin.
Yes, correct. And I think that really is the power of technology like this. You make a copy of your whole supply chain network, you visualize your network, and then you can run scenarios towards it. And I think a lot of people in who are viewing today know certain terms what you can do. So, for example, greenfield analysis. So, where should I build my next facility. Where in the world should I build my next facility? Or brownfield analysis or long range analysis, or what if scenarios. So planning with your network what to do in case something happens. And by planning this, you can allow for your whole network to react and respond to disruption when it happens according to plan. And I think the beauty is that you can not only visualize, run scenarios, and then understand what to do, but the tool will calculate for you what your best option is, based on what you find important. So that can be max profit, for example, or minimize your cost, or reducing your carbon, so what we are talking about today, and make sure that your service levels are on point still. So that's often the magic four. So profit, cost, sustainability, and service level. But you can also find the sweet spot between those. So what should I do if I want to find the sweet spot between profit, cost, carbon, service levels? And we will, so the technology and the tools and everything that comes with it will tell you what the answer is. So you can then decide based on what you see, based on the scenarios that you run, what the best approach for you is. And I think that's really valuable information in a time like this, when disruptions happen so very often, where the world is changing constantly, and you need to adapt your network on a more frequent level than maybe 10 years ago.
And I think, looking at this slide, with the 4 people having a discussion, you need to, with the visualization, you have a better grasp of what's happening and what choices do you have. So that's also a better way of discussing certain trade-offs.
Yes, correct. So often what happens is that in a boardroom or in a stakeholder, certain hypothesis comes up. So what should we do in case of this? And often that task or that business question is then given to supply chain teams or center of excellence teams, and they can run scenarios with that question in mind, and then show to that same group of stakeholders or board, like this is the impact of your decision if we take certain scenarios into play. So it really enables decision making.
Okay, but before we dig deep in the whole carbon optimization discussion, maybe a quick overview of the kind of companies you are servicing.
Yeah, so this is an overview of the companies who use our technology. And like I said, so the supply chain companies or the center of excellence teams of these companies, they work with our technology. They get business questions from different business units or from their stakeholders team, and they run scenarios towards it and plan for what to do next. It's not only that you plan for, okay, our next facility needs to be built in location X, but you can also plan for all the steps you need to take before you can be at that place. So it's not only determining where you need to go, but also the steps you need to take to come where you need to go.
So a lot of companies talk about their purpose, and also maybe it's good briefly to touch upon the mission of AIMMS as a company, and then we get to the whole carbon topic.
Yeah. So yeah. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So the story we are talking about today is sustainability, and with sustainability is, of course, this huge buzzword. Everybody talks about sustainability, but in our message, it's very, very clear. So what we can do is all around decarbonizing your networks, and for AIMMS, it's really key. It's part of our mission. It's part of why my colleagues come to work every day. So a big passion of us to get that message spread. And I think today the urgency is higher than ever, and therefore we want to talk about why.
Yeah. So you have stated different whys, and maybe you can explain the first why to optimize on carbon.
Yeah, so where the story starts is that companies have certain goals, and often those are KPIs in a stakeholder analysis document where it says, oh, we need to reduce our carbon. And I think the first steps are often offsetting, so that you purchase offset projects, which I sometimes explain as you compensate your own carbon by investing in projects which reduce carbon. But I think now more and more the trend comes that companies actually want to act on their company goals, so actually reduce the amount of carbon their carbon footprint instead of compensating this, and that's very important due to a couple of reasons. So will you go to the next slide? Perfect. A lot of the push is coming from customer demand, what we see in the market. So more than half of customers will do business only with companies that practice environmental and social sustainability. So it's really demanding from customers. And I think we all know as consumers that in a B2C world, that demand is pushed harder, but also in B2B, we see it more and more that now with the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, that also B2B customers and B2B industries, they have a need to change due to their customers.
Yeah, now what you see as of January the 1st in Germany, we have what we call the supply chain law, or in German, Lieferkettengesetz. So you have to act upon to be responsible. So you have to go upstream to make sure there is no child labor and so forth. So that's already in Germany happening. And as of next year, the European Union has demanded from publicly traded company, well, to track their the carbon emission. So we now get also in the legal part, and that's from, well, of course, your customers, but also from the legal the part. And maybe there are more whys.
Yes. So a big topic as well is attracting talent, and I think every company will recognize that it's hard nowadays to attract the right talent, and sustainability and how you approach this as a company really has an influence on the talent you can attract. And what we see with this quote from Randstad in this case is that modern employees do not want to work for unrespectable companies who practice harm society, which I think is powerful because it's another angle of business continuity to make sure that you attract the right talent.
Yeah, and of course, what we see now in the news, a lot of companies are stating their commitments and their promises, but we're in supply chain are more from the facts, so we have to prove something and we have to show something. So that's the whole point. We have to go beyond just commitments. So that's the final part, maybe.
Yes, yeah, and I think this is the biggest push what we've seen so far. So financial impact will be a big driver for sustainability, decarbonization, and making all of us aware of what we need to do. And there are a lot of changes in this space. So we have regulations, there will be tax benefits, there will be penalties. And like you said, the first regulations are coming really, really soon already. And the EU is providing regulations which are different for different industries as well. So it's very complex material. But if you do, so our technology is often used on a strategic and tactical level, and especially on strategic level, then you plan or you optimize for the coming years. But if you don't take carbon and your carbon emissions, your scope 1, your scope 3 into account, then if you optimize now for 2026 without carbon, you will not comply with the EU regulations because you don't have insights on your carbon and you are not reducing already. So therefore, we think it's really, really key to make sure that you take your carbon into account today if you plan for the coming years and the coming months. And later on, we will dive into the how, of course, but I think this is a crucial message that the world is changing rapidly and we need to take carbon into account to be compliant to assure for business continuity in the coming years.
Yeah, and like I said, as of next year, the publicly traded company are already urged by the big four, PwC, EY, KPMG, and Deloitte of this world, that for their quarterly earning calls, they have to show figures. What is the carbon footprint now, and what are your plans to improve? So to have this facts on a quarterly basis, you need to have facts and figures. You need to have a tool, some overview. So what is your footprint now, and how do you improve? So the big four are already urging the publicly traded companies, to go forward in that area. And also, what we see later on, these big companies have customers and suppliers where there's also a carbon footprint, and that will make sure that all their supply chain partners will also go in that route. So that will also have big impact for this matter. But maybe Zoe, you can summarize it.
Yeah. So I think I'm repeating myself here, but it's really urgent. So our message here is, please take your carbon emissions into account. At least know what your carbon emissions are today. So get insights on your numbers today, so that at least you know what your baseline is, and then start to optimize from there. And like you said, having insights is already coming a lot. The need to have your insights is coming earlier than the EU regulations, where you really need to comply. So I think that's a nice bridge as well to the first step, to get insights.
Yeah. All right. Maybe Facundo, you can follow up on this. So how do we do this carbon reduction? So maybe you can start with that.
Absolutely, Martin. So first, before getting into the how, there's just one more argument I think we cannot left behind. That is the urgency of the matter, and not because our company is not going to act on the goals, or we're not going to meet the demand, but because it's already getting too late, right? To make the curve of carbon going down. And this is really important, and that's why all nations gather in Paris, right, in 2015. And in order to get below the 202 degrees by 2100, we're already getting too late with our current policies, Martin. So I think it's really important that we should start acting now, if we don't want to be part of the people that didn't do anything about it, and continue acting like if nothing is happening. So I think this is, like, in my opinion, the strongest argument on why should we start considering carbon emissions and try to do something about it, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's good to know and good to see that a lot of people have registered for this webinar, because it's very important, and also to learn from you, but also from each other, to move forward. All right. But Facundo, maybe you can start. The 3 steps how to move forward, how to optimize for carbon.
Absolutely, absolutely. So actually, for reducing carbon, Martin, there's are many ways as companies in the world, I would say, because each company is different, and each company has a different supply chain, right? So of course, it's not going to be the same path for all of us. But I think the most important thing that we need to do now is to find our own path, find our way through decarbonization.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of ignorance of how do we achieve that. But I honestly believe we have all the power to do that, because we have become really good in the last few centuries on reducing cost no matter what. And we have experts to reduce cost in every part of the supply chain. And I believe strongly that we can get to the same point with carbon, but we just need to understand how. So yeah. Big
So, so maybe you can explain the 3 steps to start with.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna start like these 3 steps. It's is how to reduce your carbon emissions with a network design optimization software. So and I'm gonna show you today and explain you why this is so important and how we can make your life easier. So the first step, it will be modeling your baseline. And what is modeling your baseline? This means representate your supply chain in a network design software, like for example a software SC Navigator, because from there you can start to the second step, that it will be to analyze and run scenarios to simulate carbon reducing measures, because of course you want to know the impact of these measures before you even apply them, and you want to know how each of these measures about reducing carbon is going to impact you, because the impact is going to be huge, and you have to measure it. Otherwise you'll be just taking decisions and measures out of ignorance without knowing the full impact of each decision in your supply chain. And at the end, of course, the goal, and I think the most important thing we need to do right now, is to define your decarbonization strategy, because this is going to be the document or the statement, and the explanation on how do you think on reducing them, right? So I think we all need to plan our own strategy, and I think we are all empowered to do that. So I think it's our full responsibility.
Yeah, right. So let's go through these steps one by one, because they are too important to do it too briefly. So the first step, model your baseline. Maybe you can explain a bit more about that.
Absolutely. So modeling your baseline is a process that can take from a few weeks to a month. And it basically consists of populating a template with your supply chain data with, for example, the previous year, so 2022. And when I say data, I mean information about your demand, warehouse, production facilities, your cost, the mode of transport involved, the transport lanes, and all the carbon emissions associated with those modes of transport. So once you have your baseline in the software, then you can start understanding the origin of your carbon emissions. Where are they coming from? Am I causing them directly from my own facilities? That those will be the scope one emissions, or are they coming indirectly from the source of energy or the inbound of raw material from my suppliers? And the first step in this journey is understand where our emissions are located and where are they coming from.
I was just wondering, and we'll get maybe that later on, but now you have your data about your customer orders and your production and so forth and so on. So how difficult is it to translate this kind of data, the traditional supply chain data, into a carbon environment? So how do you have tables for that, and is it already in your AIMMS solution?
Yeah, well, actually, if you already have your supply chain model in a software, then it's super easy to add carbon, because the harder part is to represent your supply chain and make the digital twin, right?
Hmm.
And after that, adding carbon, then the other part there is to get the data. And nowadays there are many sources. We don't provide them embedded in our solution, because every supply chain is so different that this is part of the responsibility of the company. But there are many ways you can get it. Of course, there are some tables already presetted, but I think also if you want to be fully accurate, there's companies would help you with the carbon accounting specifically for your case and guide you through the process.
So maybe I talked with Zoe about visualization. In this slide, that represent different kind of emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3. Maybe you can explain it a bit further.
Absolutely. So I don't know, maybe in the audience people already know about this terminology, but in case they don't, so um, carbon emissions are commonly categorized into these three scopes, known as scope 1, 2, and 3. And they are used to measure and account for different types of greenhouse emissions within our organization's activities and supply chain. So, scope 1 emissions are the direct greenhouse gases emissions that occur from sources that are owned directly or controlled by the organization. That could be your production process, or anything that is owned by the company. And then scope 2 emissions, these are the indirect greenhouse gas emissions that result from the consumption of purchased electricity, heat, or steam by the organization. And then scope 3 emissions, which are the major part of it, these are the indirect greenhouse gas emissions that are a consequence of an organization's activity, but occur from sources not owned or controlled by the organization. So these are typically the most significant and complex to measure, but really important as well. So it's important that organizations consider all three scopes when assessing their carbon footprint and implement strategies that help you to reduce in those three different scopes.
Yeah, and what I see, last week we had our own event, and there were some companies presenting their whole supply chain and their scope 1, 2, 3, and most of the time you see that the scope 3 is representing for up to 80, 90, sometimes 95% of the whole carbon footprint. So most of the carbon footprint is outside your own company, either upstream or downstream. So that makes the world a bit complex. But to start with this visualization, you get a better grasp of what kind of data you need. And I gather that also you are helping out to point out this kind of scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, aren't you? Facundo?
Absolutely. But at the same time, Martijn, we focus on supply chain. So
Yeah.
all the emissions are that you see even employee travel or employee commute, and a lot of things that are not part of supply chain. But basically, supply chain emissions, which is most time 90% of the total emissions, are more easy to account for because they're pretty much related to transport and warehouse and production, and there's a lot of data of it. So in terms of supply chain, it's easier to point out where the big parts of carbon are coming from.
Yeah. So what I did last year, there was a lot of talk about ecosystem. McKinsey wrote about business ecosystem. Gartner was writing about supply chain ecosystem. And then in June last year, I Googled these phrases, not on the wording, but on pictures. But I didn't get anything useful. So then I decided to create my own visualization of an ecosystem. And this is an ecosystem of household products, your laundry detergent and so forth and so on. So, my explanation about this ecosystem is we were coming from linear supply chain, from raw materials to manufacturing to wholesale distribution and consumption. But now the whole ecosystem is getting more and more complex. It's looking more like an ecosystem like this, like in SimCity. You see all kind of functionalities and buildings. You have your brand manufacturer, Procter & Gamble, Reckitt, Unilever, you name them. But you have also co-packagers, and you have providers, wholesalers. So you get a whole plethora of entities. So depending where you are, outside is your scope 3 emission. So this visualization of your ecosystem makes it more understandable for all the participants, stakeholders, who is all involved, and what you could and should consider to make your visualization of your scope 3, I think. And even in the gray area, you see some other stakeholders like the investors, banks, social media, government, and NGOs. And in the brown area, you see logistics service providers, but also recycling companies. And in the green area, you see also the more green raw material providers. So basically, with this visualization, you got a whole ecosystem represented over here. And I think that, well, it is like stakeholder mapping, but it also, in a similar way, represents how the AIMMS tools look like at a network, isn't it, Facundo? So what do you think of this visualization as a part to have a better discussion about carbon emissions?
Yeah, well, I think it's really nice because I think it will help people understand maybe what are all the possible options of carbon emission sources, right? So it all depends on your company, and each company, as I said, is different. So that is the importance of understanding where are they coming from, and to understand the complexity and relationship between them.
Yeah. So maybe you can explain a bit about the second step, run scenarios, and how do you do that?
Absolutely. So by now we just made our baseline, right? But we did not even started playing and optimizing with our software. So once you have your baseline model, here it's the part where you start measuring and understanding the impact of a carbon reducing measure on your supply chain. And with simple scenario running, you can start making what if questions. So, what if I source from a different supplier? What if I close a warehouse? What if I change the packaging of my products? And what if I use another mode of transport, or whatever measure you can think to mitigate and to reduce your carbon emissions. And the interesting thing to understand is what is the cost of that measure, and how much carbon can I reduce implementing that measure. And that, Martin, is not a simple calculation that you can easily do, because each time you simulate a tiny measure, there's a big impact in your whole supply chain. And modeling each of these measures in Excel, I think it can take you forever or a long time. And then you waste plenty of time simulating hypothetical measures when you could do it way much faster and see in just a minute the impact of a measure, a carbon reducing measure in your whole supply chain.
So this sweet spot, maybe you can a bit extend more. In the old days, people are, as a KPI focusing on cost, and now I think there's a balance between these four elements. How easy is it to visualize it and to calculate all this and to get your sweet spot?
Well, yeah, so actually this sweet spot, it's really easy to calculate, because the same optimization software, the same mathematics that applies to reducing cost, you can also apply it for reduced carbon. So whenever you want to test a measure, or you just want to see optimization options or optimizations gaps where you can um, optimize your network, then you can choose if you want to optimize only for cost, or if you want to consider cost and carbon. You can only also implement and give to the system the information of how much do you pay for each ton of carbon that you emit, that it will be the carbon allowance price, right? So finding this sweet spot, it's also part of building your strategy. And some companies are already building a graphic where they see the trade-off between carbon and cost, and they decide where do they want to be standing, and what is going to be the next step, and which measures can take you to the next step.
Yeah, and I can imagine now. Yeah, carbon comes with an actual cost nowadays, but you can also tweak it to extend it. What you think as the cost? Maybe you make it way higher because the actual carbon costs are way higher than what you pay for right now. So that's also something you can incorporate in your calculations. But maybe you can explain a bit more with your supply chain navigator.
Absolutely, yeah. So this, for example, is for the people to also see how our application looks like. And this is a use case we did a month ago, and it shows how considering carbon emissions in your strategic decisions can change the optimum scenario. So this example is about a steel manufacturing company with an expansion project to Brazil. And the business question here is, where is the optimal location for a production facility, right? So in the screen, you can see two maps, because the map on the right represents the optimal solution of the expansion project, only minimizing cost, while the map on the left represents the optimal solution, minimizing cost and carbon at the same time. And I don't know if you can spot the difference, but it's marked with red there. And that dot in the middle of Brazil represents the optimal location for the new production facility. And as you can see, the location is slightly different, but has a major impact in the carbon emissions, because by considering carbon in the optimization, the location of the new production facility was pulled as close as possible to the raw material supplier. And in this case, the emissions of the transport of the main raw material were completely avoided, as you are closer to your supplier. And yeah, if from here to a few years your company will be paying for each ton of carbon that emits, then you will definitely want to go and stick with the analysis that it's including carbon emissions. Otherwise, what you think is a great choice or the best option now is not going to be in the future, as you are forgetting to take this into consideration.
Yeah, and here you have the numbers. So you see it on the left and on the right. The changes, the differences between scenario 1 and scenario 2. Yeah, so there's a significant change, and this is not only useful for creating a new network or redesigning it, but it's also if you have your current network to check if there are options to decarbonize your existing network.
Absolutely, Martin. I think that's absolutely the first step, because even with not much of an investment, you can already redesign your network. Maybe start using more efficient transport lanes than others, and that it's really simple to start to do it.
Yeah. And how long does it take to do such a calculation with your tool?
So just a click, I would say, and a few minutes. So I think in 2 minutes you can already optimize your supply chain for carbon emissions and see the difference between that and your solution for only minimizing cost.
Yeah. Okay, moving forward. So what is the next step?
Yeah, perfect. So far, we already modeled our baseline, and on top of that baseline, we simulated many decarbonization measures. And now we have come to the most important moment. So take the strategic decision of how am I going to reduce my carbon emissions and why? And which set of measures am I going to implement and when? And to answer those questions, it's necessary to compare the measures by at least some of the following factors I brought down in there. And this is quite obvious, right? Because you will have to justify these measures with your stakeholders, right? You cannot just simply say, yeah, we're going to reduce carbon this way, and I don't care about the consequences. So the first important thing to see is the carbon reduction potential. And with this, I mean, how much carbon emissions can I reduce by taking a measure, which is really simple but super important, right? And then a second thing that you should compare your measures against from each other, it will be the cost effectiveness of that measure. So the ratio between the cost of implementing a measure and how much carbon do I reduce with this measure. And here we're talking about the investment needed and also the cost variation of the supply chain. And then, last but not least, a really important thing that a lot of people skip is to analyze the interrelationship with these measures. Because maybe taking two measures at the same time can cause synergy and reduce your carbon emissions even more. But maybe a specific combinations of measures can be counterproductive and even increase it because you're not taking the full picture and reality into account. So these are just a few examples, but you can own the analysis yourself and see what fits better for your organization goals.
If you look at it right, you have 9 possible options to start with. Yeah, I think is there a certain order to start with, or how do you regard these 9 options to start the decarbonization?
Yeah, so I just took my favorite ones out of a book I'm reading that is Decarbonization of Logistics. And I really liked it because they seem to me really possible to do, right? So they're not really far away as changing your whole fleet to electric. That is chief of mode of transport, of course, but there are like all the things that you can start doing that are reducing your carbon emissions. Like, for example, reduce the number of links in your network is going to take drastically your carbon emissions down. And simulating this measure, I think it's really powerful. Even also slowing down your supply chain. So we are crazy for service levels in supply chain, but actually maybe sacrificing some of that service level and going to a higher lead time, you can really also reduce your carbon emission this way. So these are just a few examples, but I think reduce the miles driven is also really important because you can easily do it in the application in a few steps, and it can give you like really amazing results.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about these 9 options boxes, have a discussion about it. What is cause and effect, and which one are, like you said, are related to each other, which is helping out the other one. And also, what I think internally, we have all kind of assumptions that supply chain and decarbonization will take a lot of effort and a lot of money, a lot of investments. But I think having these kind of 9 options to discuss, and probably are more, but we'll get to the discussion and then connect it to your tool or your network design. How easy is it to visualize it and to make some sense out of it in financial matters and figures? So I think these 9 boxes are already a great starting point to have a discussion and then translate it into numbers and facts and some scenarios.
Absolutely, Martin. Absolutely.
But we talk about the carbon emissions, but there's more to sustainability. Maybe can elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, for sure. So we talk about a lot about carbon emissions. Maybe that's because it's the most important topic nowadays. But the feature about where you can use carbon, you can actually measure and optimize any objective that is important for your company. So that could be energy consumption, water consumption, climate risk, or recycled materials. So basically anything that is important for you to minimize or maximize, depending on your situation. And you can add it to your model, the same one you use for carbon emissions. You can add this on top and also see the impact on other ESG aspects, parameters from your supply chain.
Interesting point is you have your actual carbon costs, but in the future it will be way higher. And if you want to get there, maybe you can tweak it, but also and still you can translate it into euros or dollars. But the same goes with energy and water and maybe some risk. You can put some numbers to it. So that's another thing.
Yeah.
Interesting point. So I think if you have this model and you make use of it, then it's easy to tweak. I think to I wouldn't say bogus elements, but to transfer water into euros or put them in the model to make better comparison.
Absolutely.
So Zoe, I think getting to the roadmap, and then we get to the Q&A heading there. So maybe you can elaborate to create a roadmap. So we have seen the why and the how. So what are the next step to actually start all this?
Yeah, good point. So also for AIMMS, like I said, sustainability and helping our customers to achieve what is important for them, we also have functionality on our roadmap to go beyond what we can do today. I think the first one is the most exciting one from a climate change perspective. So in the next quarter, we will release functionality that will allow you as a supply chain team or a company to embed risk rating indices into your optimization, which means that you can rank your assets based on climate data, so trend data, which tells you, okay, how risky is my current network today based on climate trend data. So, for example, what we see now that in Eastern Europe, the Southern Europe, like Spain, there's a very, very extreme drought, which is has a lot of impact on people's lives there. Based on the climate trend data, we knew that was coming already. So if we can give these insights to you as a supply chain company, you can say, okay, I have facilities, factories in locations where we see a huge change in climate trend data, which will have an impact in the coming years. Then you can decide what to do in order to be responsive to that change. Do you need to change all your locations, for example, or can you make short-term changes by shifting inventory or selecting different suppliers to make sure that even that you know that you're in a red zone, so to say, that you can still drift the disruption away from your networks. So this is, I think, very, very powerful insights. So that will be released in the next quarter. Following on the regulations that are coming, we know that carbon emissions allowances will be there, which means that based on your industry, there will be certain thresholds that you are allowed to have your carbon on. So we will build functionality into our tool, which makes sure that for your industry, you optimize with the right thresholds in place. Very key to comply with the regulations. And another one, the third one there, is a backhaul functionality to make sure that we optimize the routes of the transport, so between lanes, to prevent empty trucks or empty boats or empty containers, to make sure that you ship or truck or drive or fly as efficiently as possible, to make sure that also you really reduce your carbon and make sure you take most out of your network.
So the first part, the risk index, is quite interesting. First you have your current network and you do scenarios, but also be aware of what's going on, well, in the next years to come, with drought in southern Europe, but also with political risk, a possible risk over there, but also new legislation coming up, and that's also that you can be more strategically aware and prepared for what's happening for your network, and how to deal with it.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
All right. Finally, talk about the solutions of AIMMS. Maybe you can tell a bit more. There are some questions, and we'll get to in the Q&A. But also maybe you can already address these points to the audience. Can you tell me a bit more about the solution? What kind of solution do you have in store?
Yeah, good point. So the AIMMS solution comes in two shapes and sizes, I always say. So what Facundo shared and the functionalities that we share today are all available in our off-the-shelf product, which is called SC Navigator, which is in blue on the slide. This is an off-the-shelf tool where you, as supply chain teams or sustainability teams, you can take the tool, you can make a digital copy of your networks, you can visualize, and then you can run those scenarios. So what if climate change hits? What if I need to take my carbon into account? What is the sweet spot between my carbon reduction and my profit? All those type of questions you can answer in the off-the-shelf version, so in SC Navigator. We also have a bespoke platform which allows companies to build their own applications. So that means that if our off-the-shelf product is not sufficient for you, or you want to go deeper or more detailed, or like build your own application, then the bespoke platform is a great solution there. It also is used by a lot of our partners, and I think both solutions are key for making sure that networks can change and adapt to what is coming in the coming years on the carbon topics. Off the shelf to just start with, and bespoke to build it completely to your own wishes.
So I also know that AIMMS has quite an active community of users of the bespoke supply chain planning apps. So what does it mean, this community? Are they exchanging knowledge and experiences of their tools? So how do I see this kind of community?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so indeed, from the bespoke platform, we have a very active community, which means indeed that users talk to each other, they ask questions to each other, they give tips and tricks, they help each other out, and it's amazing to see what's happening there. It's very valuable, and if you as a company are interested in a bespoke platform, I do recommend to be part of that community because there's so much valuable information there.
Okay, good to know. All right, thanks for now for your presentation. We're now getting to the Q&A part, and I see a lot of questions coming in. Well, in the chat function, so I have to switch from the Q&A text bubble functionality to the chat. I was wondering, interesting question I saw. You mentioned that you will release later this year carbon emission allowances. There was a question maybe related to that. Does AIMMS have benchmark CO2 data to compare internal data with, or is it in line of your later release with the emission allowances? Zoe?
It's not yet part to benchmark, but I see now that when we talk about sustainability, that we talk about carbon, it's I get this question a lot, so there's definitely something here. So we are currently investigating what we can do there. So I cannot promise anything, but I see the need and we are searching for the solution.
Yeah, but I think, if you have the carbon emission allowances in your system in a later release, that is a kind of a benchmark. That's something, a target you can address. I think. Another thing is, will bespoke apps still receive AIMMS updates, data, and functionality? So if you have a
Okay, the roadmap. So the roadmap items I showed are specifically for SC Navigator, and for the bespoke part, you have all the tools to build it yourself. So there, it's, I think, less relevant to have the updates, because it's completely tailor made for yourself. So the roadmap I showed is related to SC Navigator, so the off the shelf tool.
Yeah. Okay, good to know. That's a good question. Well, we touched upon it earlier, but maybe we can address it a bit further. What is the novelty of integrating carbon emissions if you consider carbon merely as a cost, carbon allowances? This results in a cost minimalization optimization economy rather than a multi-objective optimization economy versus environment. So, how easy or how hard is it that to use a different version of this carbon cost? Maybe
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can take this one. So it is true that you can consider carbon as a cost and then do the trade-off of how much do I pay for each ton of carbon. And I think that is really valuable if you're actually paying for that carbon. But you also, of course, has a chance to the option to only minimize carbon without taking care of the cost, and you minimize the tons of carbons that you also have. And therefore you can play around and also set limits. So for example, you can reduce you can put a constraint about reducing carbon 10% and see what would be the impact on cost, and the other way around, how much carbon can I reduce with this amount of investment. So it's really powerful and flexible in the way that you can model those constraints and choose what do you want to optimize for, and make multiple objectives optimizations.
So in my opinion, okay, you see a lot of companies making great commitments, but now you can slice down these commitments in steps, and you make it more practical and more tangible with the scenarios, which step to take first, and to execute on these commitments. Another question. This recording will be made available, through Supply Chain Movement. There will be an article about what we have been speaking in the last 60 minutes, but also a link to this recording. So that's one thing. Another question from my side, Zoe. Is getting more sustainable very expensive, or maybe, of course, if you have a license with AIMMS, that it will help. But what is your point of that sustainability will cost you a lot of money?
Yeah, I think that's the overall assumption that is made, that to become more sustainable is only a cost element, so it will increase your cost significantly. And I think with our tools we can prove that getting or reducing your carbon does not have to go hand in hand with an increase of your cost. So I think finding that sweet spot between your profit, your cost, your carbon, and your service level is really, really powerful. So my answer is no. Getting more sustainable, reducing your carbon is not the same thing as increasing your cost.
No. And I think that the 9 boxes, the 9 strategy options Facundo has presented is a great way to address this. Which one we should do first by reduce empty running, for example. If you optimize the loading of your vehicles, that will save you money and cost, and also will save you some carbon penalties, I would say. So that's the first start thing. Final question before we wrap up, and we have some extra 30 minutes afterwards, like I said. Maybe Facundo, you can address this. How do you simulate transport costs and carbon emissions if you identify a new location? And is there a simplification taken, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, so actually it's really easy. So if you have a new location, for example, you just need to say how that location will interact with the other parts of your supply chain. So if it's a production facility, you can simply put in the model what are all the options to supply that facility. And normally carbon emissions for transport are in a cost per kilometer. So if you know your mode of transport and how much carbon do you emit for kilometer for a specific load size, then it's really easy in the software to create all these possible lanes, and then the software itself with the optimizations chooses the best options among a universe of possibilities. So that is how you can add new locations, and you can add not only one, but you can add many of them, and also let choose which location is the most optimum and why, and what is the impact on carbon of that.
Yeah, and a good point with your kind of application is, you can also tweak the transportation costs. Well, we have seen a rise in fuel cost in the last years, and that will change. So you can have way more scenarios with the changing cost of transportation, and with the trains, shipping, etc. So that's the easy part. For now, we're out of time, actually. And like I said, right after this, Zoe, Facundo, and myself will be joining at table 1. So if you have more questions, feel free to join us at table 1 to address further questions to them directly. It's kind of a Zoom meeting, so don't be scared. We won't bite, so we will address further questions. For further explanation, for further reading, on the left, we have created a checklist together with AIMMS about network design and the tooling. So there's a very practical checklist with 10 questions you should ask yourself. So there's the contact details of Facundo and Zoe. And next on the right, you see also the link to our ecosystem you can download and have a further explanation about how to do that yourself in your own ecosystem. So there's more information about AIMMS and their community on their website. So with this link, you can go there. And with that, I would like to thank you, Zoe, for explanation, and Facundo. So thank you for joining me. Zoe, thank you.
Thank you.
Also,
Thank you very
Facundo,
much,
thank you.
Martijn.
Yeah, thank you. And the audience, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you can take away some practical stuff there for further internal explanation about the way forward and this important journey for sustainability and decarbonization. And I think that the tool of AIMMS is very helpful and very practical to get there. So for now, I would like to thank you, and I hope to see you in another webinar. I think that next month there will also be a webinar with AIMMS together with ABN Dev. Also cool stuff. So there will be a customer of AIMMS joining me in a webinar. So for now, I'd like to wrap up, and thank you for now. And maybe I will see you in the next webinar, or maybe I'll see you in the lounge together with Facundo and Zoe and myself. Thanks for now, and bye-bye.